Hi everyone, welcome to Devex at the World Health Assembly. Today we're here to talk about a much contentious issue of IP waivers for the COVID-19 vaccine. And I have with me Thomas Cueni, who is the Director General of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, and Ellen Tihuin, who is a lawyer and public health advocate with over 30 years of experience working on pharmaceutical and intellectual property policies. Now, I understand that the two of you come to this issue with slightly different perspectives, so it would be great to hear both your points of view and sort of try to understand what is the future of the IP waiver and what that means for the COVID-19 vaccine going forward. So Ellen, would you like to start? Would you like to begin by telling us what the importance is of the US, reversing its stand on the IP waiver and really coming out in support of it, and what it means for other countries and other organizations as we are now looking at, the pandemic that is still kind of surging the world over?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to take part in this in this discussion, which is indeed a very important one, and we've been involved in this for quite a while, because while the TRIPS waiver was proposed in early October last year by India and South Africa, those were the countries that put the proposal on the table at the TRIPS Council at the World Trade Organization, which is the body that discusses issues of intellectual property. And the idea of the TRIPS waiver is that it would allow countries to suspend the protection of intellectual property on products that are necessary to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic for the duration of the pandemic. So it's quite it's a limited proposal. I want to stress that, because I sometimes hear people talk about, the TRIPS waiver, we're going to suspend intellectual property forever and for everything, but it is really quite narrow and focused on issues related to the pandemic. But what is important, it's important to actually go back a little bit further in the history of last year, because earlier that year, almost more than a year ago, the World Health Organization had launched the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, which was is a voluntary mechanism. It offers a platform to those who hold intellectual property, including know-how, data, knowledge, technology that is necessary to, for example, produce vaccines and other products, to share those on that platform voluntarily. But that didn't get a very good response. That pool remains empty until today. And that is important background to understand why developing countries are saying we actually need more forceful measures. And that is how the issue was put on the agenda of the World Trade Organization's TRIPS Council. Now, you fairly quickly saw the sort of traditional divide of developing countries supporting South Africa and India, and the high-income countries saying no to the TRIPS waiver and raising lots of questions about it. And fairly recently, in a surprise move, the Biden administration has come out in support of a TRIPS waiver for vaccines, which surprised everyone, I think, although President Biden in his election campaign had promised that he would ensure that IP would not stand in the way of worldwide access to vaccines. So it sort of, he was sort of fulfilling his campaign promises. Now, what will ultimately happen will depend on the negotiations in the TRIPS Council, because the United States, as important as it is one country, and it can make a proposal, but the ultimate agreement will have to be reached in the TRIPS Council. Countries remain divided. The European continent is divided. There is not an EU position yet, as far as I know, and we've seen European countries respond very, very differently. It will be important to see what they are going to do. But a much bigger question is, and I'm sure it's one you will also want to discuss, and it's probably also one that Thomas wants to discuss, is what can the TRIPS waiver deliver, and what can it not deliver, and what else needs to happen. But in short, the message from the Biden administration is very, very clear. They're saying it cannot be business as usual. Something will need to give. And the double no position that we've seen, rejecting the COVID-19 technology access pool, the voluntary mechanism, and rejecting the TRIPS waiver or action at the WTO, those are not positions that remain tenable in the current situation.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Ellen. Thomas, coming to you now, I'll pose the question that Ellen has raised. What will the waiver do? And, does the US's position put pressure on other countries now? And where do you think, this movement of sorts is going next?
I hope you don't mind, but we really need to put this in context, because the context is the world has been confronted with SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, with the biggest public health crisis since 1918-19, when we had the Spanish flu. And when I look at where are we, 15 months after the pandemic was declared, I think one first has to acknowledge we have seen an amazing victory and triumph of science. And when we look at where does this come from, when I discussed the challenges in June, July last year, I can tell you most people I asked were expecting that we might have vaccines by maybe early summer 21. Now, we are not yet in early summer 21, but we have seen vaccine rollouts since early December in the US and the UK, and actually since the end of January in other parts of the world. And not one vaccine, but several safe and much more effective. You also have to bear in mind that originally the objective was a vaccine with 50% plus effectiveness. We have had 2 mRNA vaccines with 90% plus effectiveness. Therefore, we have seen a triumph of science. And why have we seen this? Because everyone, academia, biotech companies, big pharma, industrialized developing countries, really engaged in working, developing safe and effective vaccines, and already more than a year ago, started partnerships, started scale up at risk. We have seen, for example, 3 of the top 4 vaccine manufacturers failing with their projects. But each and every one of them came in and offered partnerships with fill and finish, with active substance. Therefore, we have seen something. Ellen was talking about this CTAP concept. Now, what we saw is this is happening. Technology transfer on a large scale. We have seen more than 280 contracts signed between big pharma and big pharma, biotech and big pharma, but also industrialized and developing country manufacturers. And more than 200 of them include technology transfer. Why do I say that in the context of the waiver discussion? Because it was done with really the common objective. We need to vaccinate the world. We do need the 10 billion plus doses to bring the COVID-19 vaccines to all who need them, who want them, and hopefully in most countries for free, as it is in my country. And we are on track of achieving that. But by and large, the challenges and complexity of vaccine manufacturing were hugely underestimated and still are. And by and large, the industry has exactly reacted as you would hope. Unprecedented partnership, helping out with know-how transfer, joint training of skilled workers, and we are in there. The waiver as such wouldn't do anything to address the bottlenecks which we have, because the bottlenecks are different, but the waiver would question the very legal framework which encouraged and gave companies the trust to sign contracts with developing country vaccine manufacturers, to engage with other big pharma companies, to engage with biotech. And we really shouldn't lose out of sight. The objective is to get the vaccines to the people who need them. And there we are confronted with an unacceptable situation now. We see 18-year-old healthy kids in, for example, the US vaccinated at the time when, because of the crisis in India, almost no vaccines are reaching Africa. That is something which we need to address as a matter of urgency immediately. And that's where we need to have more solidarity from the rich countries with the poor.
Right. Thomas, you talk about solidarity and you talk about, vaccine inequity in a way, right? I mean, we can see that most of the US and the Western world almost seems to be going back to normal now, whereas where I am in India, we're still in lockdown. Cases are increasing every day. So if not the IP waiver, what do you see as a solution to this issue of vaccine inequity? What do we need to do? And who needs to get behind these solutions?
Now, the short-term solutions, as I said, if you really want to get something done now, you really need to have the rich countries start sharing doses now and not in 4 or 5 months' time when everybody in the US, the UK, or Europe is vaccinated. And we do call out to the rich countries. And we have found resonance, for example, the European Union at the summit recently, they embraced this. The second one is, and we were co-convening already in March, a roundtable looking at the bottlenecks, which are normal. The 10 billion COVID-19 vaccine mean you have a trebling of vaccine capacity overnight. Pre-COVID-19, the world produced 5 billion vaccines for all the diseases together, including seasonal flu. Now we need 10 billion for COVID-19 alone. It's normal, and when I talk to vaccine manufacturers, CEOs, the big shortage and bottleneck is raw material right now. It's not capacity, it's not machinery. And the second big issue is trade barriers. We have all seen, Poonawalla shouting out at POTUS, please, stop blocking supply chains, stop using the Defense Production Act, do send us the ingredients which we need, because vaccine manufacturing is complex. To give you, an image, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine needs 280 ingredients from 86 suppliers coming from 19 different countries. And now Pfizer-BioNTech have done an amazing piece of work in scaling up manufacturing. Last November, they expected to be able to manufacture 1.3 billion doses. Now they talk about 2.5 billion as realistic, maybe even 3 billion this year, which basically would suffice for 30% of the world need. And we have seen similar scaling up, for example, from other manufacturers. But we do see challenges, for example, in the partnerships AstraZeneca has with the Serum Institute of India. I think I understand the domestic needs now, but we need to find, that's why I did mention these mRNA vaccines, we need to see a willingness from rich countries to start sharing. And I also believe that we could see efficiency gains if we do establish, for example, a matchmaking marketplace where companies who are in need, urgent need of giant plastic bags for the single-use bioreactors, for filters or RNA or other critical ingredients could deposit their needs. And there may be companies whose vaccine projects are delayed or failed, who may have actually a surplus. And that's something which honestly, WTO, COVAX, CEPI, Gavi, WHO, and us, together with our colleagues from the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturing Network, I think we can really do an immediate contribution to tackling the crisis.
Right. Ellen, would you like to respond to Thomas's point that, there's been so much progress made so far and IP waivers are not really the issue that are standing in the way, but as he said, there are all these other concerns. Where do you think that stands in the shortages that we see right now, and in really looking at solving this issue and really taking the manufacturing forward in the next 3 or 6 months to come?
Well, let me echo by what Thomas said, that we have seen an unprecedented sort of coming together of the world of science to bring these new vaccines to a reality. That has been absolutely phenomenal. And what you saw initially is what drove that was also the openness, the open science, and the sharing of the data, and the collaboration between scientists to develop these vaccines as rapidly as possible. That was really phenomenal. The other phenomenal element of that was the very significant investments and purchase commitments that were made by various governments. We should not underestimate the amounts of public financing that has gone into the development of these vaccines. That has been absolutely key to both support the scientists and the manufacturers that took up the role of producing and supplying these vaccines. That has been key. And I think in going forward, we need to keep that into focus, because that should not be a one-off thing. In the advocacy for sharing of that knowledge and the sharing of that intellectual property, and it will be no one's surprise that I will maintain the position that that will continue to be important when we move forward. Yes, there are 100,000 other things that need to be resolved, but we also need to have a global discussion about the sharing of the know-how and the knowledge that has been created with these enormous amounts of public financing. And as part of that discussion needs to be the continued demand and the continued pressure on the public sector to continue to financially support the development of vaccines and other tools that are necessary in pandemic response. The other area that we need to address is the fact that there are regions in the world where there is very little to no vaccine manufacturing capacity. Of course, you cannot ask to transfer technologies to areas where there is no one to receive it. But it does say something about how unprepared the world was for this pandemic, despite the fact that for decades, and Thomas will agree with me there, we've been at many World Health Assemblies together, and every year the Director General of the World Health Assembly says, please, make sure you're prepared because the big one is going to come. Well, here is the big one. And I think the first thing we have to conclude is the world was not prepared. And in moving forward and getting prepared also for the future, we need to address these issues of the financing of the innovation to make sure that that continues the way it happened in the last year, and the sharing of the knowledge that is then created. We also need investments in manufacturing capacity, because the world today has capacity for 3.5 billion doses, while 11 billion is needed to vaccinate 70% of the world population, which is sort of the level you need to get at. So for that, it is all hands on deck, and there is untapped manufacturing capacity that today is not used. There are manufacturers that have, without success, applied for licenses from corporations that hold the IP and have not gotten that. So that is something that also needs to be resolved. There needs to be a confidence in countries that may start to invest in manufacturing capacity and in donors that may be willing to contribute to that also in the future that transfer of technology and that sharing of the intellectual property indeed will happen. And I hope that the discussions at the TRIPS Council will also, or that these proposals at the TRIPS Council and the upcoming World Health Assembly, or the World Health Assembly that's actually taking place as we speak, will address these issues. But I cannot stress the public financing that has contributed. Without that, we would not be where we are today. One other point where Thomas and I agree, I saw the headlines of 12-year-olds may be receiving the vaccine as of next week. And I think, what kind of world are we living in when health workers in Africa and India are not being vaccinated, and we're starting vaccinating 12-year-olds in North America? That is a completely disconnected world. And it doesn't matter whether you support the TRIPS waiver or not. If you let that happen, then the world really suffers from a complete breakdown in solidarity. And solidarity is what needs to underpin moving forward. The world needs to come together. This posturing and the conflicts that are breaking out at various levels and between countries and between companies, that really has to stop. We need to figure out a way to come together, and that doesn't always mean that we have to agree on every single point. But where are the areas where we can make progress? And sharing needs to be the theme of that game.
Thank you so much, Helen. I'm glad that between the differences, there are points that we agree on, and there are issues that we look forward to being resolved, sort of, in a way that can prepare us not just for COVID-19 but for future pandemics to come. Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you so much, Thomas, for your time. We look forward to covering this issue here at Devex. We look forward to discussing it more as the World Health Assembly goes on. Thank you, and thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.